Marcus Thompson adjusted his dress uniform one final time before stepping out of his car. The afternoon sun reflected off his polished metals as he walked toward the entrance of Henderson's fine dining. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 years of job hunting, he finally had an interview for a management position at one of the city's most respected restaurants. The parking lot was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon, which made sense since lunch service would be winding down. Marcus had researched the restaurant thoroughly. Henderson's had been serving the community for 43 years, known for its prime steaks and white tablecloth service. The owner, Robert Henderson, had inherited the business from his father and maintained its reputation as a gathering place for the city's business elite. Marcus pushed through the heavy oak doors and approached the hostess station. A young blonde woman looked up from a reservation book, her smile fading slightly when she saw him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cooler than the greeting she had given the white couple who entered just before him. "I have an appointment with Mr. Henderson at 2:30, Marcus replied, checking his watch. "Marcus Thompson." The hostess flipped through her book, frowning. "I don't see anything here. Are you sure you have the right day?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the confirmation email. "Yes, ma'am. We scheduled this last week." She glanced at the email, but didn't really read it. "Well, Mr. Henderson is very busy today. Maybe you could call and reschedule." Before Marcus could respond, an older man in an expensive suit emerged from the dining room. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his face carried the confident expression of someone who had never been told no. This had to be Robert Henderson. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" Henderson asked, looking between the hostess and Marcus. "This man says he has an appointment, but I can't find it anywhere," Sarah said, her voice carrying a hint of suspicion. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Marcus Thompson. We spoke last week about the assistant manager position." Henderson looked at Marcus's outstretched hand, but didn't take it. His eyes moved over Marcus's uniform, lingering on the combat ribbons and paratrooper wings. For a moment, something flickered across his face, perhaps recognition or respect for military service. But it passed quickly. "Oh yes, Thompson. I remember now." Henderson's voice was carefully neutral. "Unfortunately, we've decided to go in a different direction with that position." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Sir, we had an appointment. I drove 2 hours to get here. I understand, and I apologize for any inconvenience. Sometimes these things happen in business." Henderson was already turning away, clearly considering the conversation over. "Could I ask what changed?" Marcus pressed. "When we spoke on the phone, you seemed very interested in my background. 8 years of military experience, leadership training, experience managing teams of 30 soldiers." Henderson turned back, and now there was irritation in his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, as I said, we've decided to go in a different direction. The position requires someone who fits our culture here at Henderson's." The word culture hung in the air like smoke. Marcus understood exactly what Henderson meant, even if the man was too careful to say it outright. He looked around the dining room, taking in the sea of white faces among the staff and customers. Not a single person of color anywhere. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "And what exactly is the culture here?" Henderson's jaw tightened. "Our clientele has certain expectations. They're comfortable with a particular type of service, a particular type of environment. I'm sure you understand." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, but his military training kicked in. "Stay calm. Stay professional. Don't give them an excuse to call you difficult or aggressive. Mr. Henderson, I served my country for 8 years. I led men and women of all backgrounds into combat. I've managed supply chains, personnel, and budgets larger than this restaurant's annual revenue. What about my qualifications makes me unsuitable for your culture?" A few diners had stopped eating to watch the conversation. Marcus could feel their stares, could sense their discomfort at witnessing this moment of truth. Henderson glanced around, aware that his regular customers were listening. He lowered his voice. "Look, son, I'm not saying you're not qualified. I'm saying it wouldn't work out. For your sake, as much as ours. You'd be happier somewhere else." "Somewhere else," Marcus repeated. "Somewhere more suited to my kind." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sarah, the hostess, looked like she wanted to disappear. The diners were pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. Henderson straightened his tie. I think this conversation is over, Mr. Thompson. I'll have to ask you to leave. Marcus looked around the restaurant one more time. He memorized the layout, the decor, the faces of the staff who had witnessed this moment. Then, he looked back at Henderson. You know what, Mr. Henderson? You're right. This conversation is over. But this situation isn't. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet dining room. As he reached for the handle, he heard Henderson call after him. And don't think about making trouble. We have lawyers. Marcus paused with his hand on the door. Without turning around, he said, So do I, sir. So do I. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his car for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He had known discrimination existed, had experienced it in smaller ways throughout his life. But this was so blatant, so casual, that it left him shaken. He pulled out his phone and called his wife, Jennifer. How did it go? She asked, excitement in her voice. Marcus stared at the restaurant's front entrance. They didn't want me. What do you mean? You said the phone interview went great. It did, until they saw what I looked like. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. Evorme dress uniform, yen. I thought maybe if they saw my service record, my medals, but none of that mattered. All they saw was my skin color. What are you going to do? Marcus watched through the restaurant's windows as Henderson talked animatedly with his staff, probably making sure everyone had their story straight. I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something. After hanging up, Marcus didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he opened his laptop and began typing. If Henderson wanted to play games about culture and fitting in, Marcus would show him what real American values looked like. He started with a detailed account of what had just happened, documenting every word of the conversation while it was still fresh in his memory. Then, he began researching employment law, discrimination statutes, civil rights protections. He had learned in the Army that information was the most powerful weapon. As he worked, other customers came and went from Henderson's. All white, all well-dressed, all part of the culture that Henderson was so determined to protect. Marcus wondered how many qualified people of color had been turned away from this door over the years. How many had simply driven away and never said anything. His phone buzzed with a text from his buddy Chris, another veteran who had helped him network for jobs. How'd the interview go, brother? Marcus typed back. They made it clear they don't want my type. Chris called immediately. What the hell does that mean? Marcus explained the situation while Chris listened with growing anger. That's illegal as hell, man. You can't just turn someone away because of their race. Sure you can, if you're smart about it. You just say they don't fit the culture. Or you tell them the position's been filled. There are 100 ways to discriminate without saying the words. So what's the plan? Marcus looked at his laptop screen, filled with notes and research. I'm going to expose them. They want to talk about culture? Let's see how their culture holds up under scrutiny. You know they'll fight back. Guys like Henderson don't go down easy. Neither do paratroopers, Chris. Neither do paratroopers. After ending the call, Marcus continued his research. He discovered that Henderson's had never had a person of color in management. In fact, looking at photos from their website and social media, they appeared to have very few employees of color at all. For a restaurant in a city that was 30% African American, that was statistically improbable unless it was intentional. He also found reviews from other customers of color who had complained about poor service or being seated in less desirable areas of the restaurant. The pattern was becoming clear. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus developed his strategy. This wasn't just about getting a job anymore. This was about standing up for every veteran who had come home to face discrimination. Every qualified person who had been turned away because they didn't look right. Every American who believed that service and character mattered more than skin color. He thought about his grandfather, who had fought in Korea and come home to a country that still wouldn't let him eat at certain restaurants. He thought about his father, who had broken barriers in his corporate career, but still had to be twice as good as his white colleagues. And he thought about his own children, who deserved to grow up in a world where their qualifications would be judged on merit, not prejudice. Marcus closed his laptop and started his car. Henderson's might think this was over, but it was just beginning. The old man had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed that Marcus would quietly accept discrimination and walk away. But Henderson didn't know who he was dealing with. Marcus Thompson hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from fights. He hadn't earned his Ranger tab by accepting defeat. And he certainly wasn't going to let some racist restaurant owner think he could disrespect a decorated veteran with impunity. As he drove home, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving the Army. A clear mission with defined objectives. Henderson's fine dining had just declared war on the wrong soldier. The battle lines were drawn. Now it was time to see who really understood what American values meant. Marcus spent the weekend building his case. His dining room table became a command center, covered with printed emails, legal documents, and research about Henderson's fine dining. Jennifer brought him coffee and watched him work with the same focused intensity he had shown during his military deployments. "You're in full battle mode," she observed, setting down a fresh cup beside his laptop. "This isn't just about me anymore," Marcus replied, without looking up from his screen. "I found 14 online reviews from customers of color describing poor treatment at Henderson's." 14 yen. That's not a coincidence. He showed her his computer screen, which displayed a spreadsheet he had created tracking incidents over the past 3 years. Complaints about being seated near the kitchen or bathroom. Servers who ignored tables of black customers for extended periods. Reservations that mysteriously disappeared when people with ethnic-sounding names arrived. Look at this pattern. Every single complaint describes the same type of treatment. Henderson's has a system in place to discourage customers of color. Jennifer read through several reviews, her expression growing more serious with each one. "This is really happening. It's been happening for years. I'm just the first person with the resources and motivation to document it properly." Marcus had reached out to several of the reviewers through social media. 3 had agreed to speak with him, sharing details about their experiences that were too painful to include in public reviews. A young black professional who had been celebrating a promotion only to be treated like a threat. An elderly couple who had saved for months to afford their anniversary dinner, then spent the evening watching white couples receive better service. A mixed-race family whose children had been stared at throughout their meal. "What's your plan?" Jennifer asked. Marcus pulled up another document on his screen. "First, I file a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That creates an official record and starts a federal investigation. Second, I contact local civil rights organizations to document the pattern of customer discrimination. Third, I tell my story publicly. Publicly, social media, local news, whoever will listen. Henderson thinks he can quietly discriminate because people like me usually don't have a platform. But times are changing." Jennifer sat down beside him. "You know this is going to get ugly. Men like Henderson don't just apologize and change their ways." Marcus nodded. "I know, but staying quiet isn't an option. How many other veterans has he turned away? How many qualified people has he rejected because they don't fit his culture?" On Monday morning, Marcus drove to the EEOC office downtown. The federal building was imposing, with its concrete facade and metal detectors at every entrance. But Marcus felt comfortable in government buildings. After 8 years in the Army, bureaucracy held no fear for him. The intake officer, Ms. Rodriguez, reviewed his documentation with growing interest. "This is very thorough, Mr. Thompson. Most people don't come in with this level of detail." "Military training," Marcus explained. "I learned to document everything." Ms. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That will help your case significantly. Based on what you've presented here, we definitely have grounds for an investigation. I have to tell you, though, these cases can take months or even years to resolve." "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere." After filing the EEOC complaint, Marcus met with Rebecca Collins, a civil rights attorney who had been recommended by his veterans organization. Her office was modest, but professional, with law books lining every wall and civil rights memorabilia scattered throughout. "I've seen cases like this before," Rebecca said, after reviewing his materials. "The challenge is that Henderson was careful not to state his discrimination explicitly. He used code words like culture and fitting in. But that's still illegal, right? Absolutely. The law prohibits discrimination based on race, regardless of how cleverly it's disguised. The question is whether we can prove discriminatory intent. Your military background actually helps here. How so? Veterans receive special protection under federal employment law. Discriminating against a veteran can carry additional penalties. And your service record makes it impossible for them to claim you are unqualified. Rebecca explained the legal process while Marcus took careful notes. She could file a civil lawsuit alongside the EEOC complaint, seeking damages for lost wages and emotional distress. More importantly, they could seek an injunction requiring Hendersons to change their hiring and service practices. What are you hoping to achieve here? Rebecca asked. Financial compensation? Policy changes? Public accountability? Marcus thought for a moment. All of that. But mostly, I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. On Tuesday evening, Marcus posted his story on social media. He had debated the wording carefully, keeping to facts rather than emotions. He described the interview, included quotes from his conversation with Henderson, and explained his decision to take legal action. I didn't serve my country for 8 years to come home and face the same discrimination my grandfather fought against, he wrote. Henderson's Fine Dining needs to understand that this behavior is unacceptable in 2024. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, his post had been shared hundreds of times. Veterans groups picked up the story. Civil rights organizations offered support. Local news stations called asking for interviews. But the reaction wasn't entirely positive. Some commenters questioned his account, suggesting he was playing the race card or looking for easy money. Others defended Henderson's right to hire whoever he wanted. A few made racist comments that forced Marcus to turn off notifications. The internet can be a cruel place, Jennifer observed, reading through some of the hostile responses. Let them show their true colors, Marcus replied. Every racist comment proves my point about the culture we're dealing with. On Wednesday, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was professional but concerned. Mr. Thompson? This is Angela Washington from Channel 7 News. I'd like to speak with you about your experience at Henderson's Fine Dining. Angela was a respected investigative journalist who had covered civil rights issues throughout her career. She wanted to interview Marcus on camera and had already begun her own research into Henderson's employment practices. I've spoken with former employees, Angela explained when they met at a coffee shop near the television station. Some interesting patterns are emerging. She showed Marcus her notes. 2 former servers, both people of color, had described a hostile work environment at Henderson's. They claimed managers made racist comments about customers and consistently assigned them the worst shifts and sections. Both had quit rather than endure the discrimination. Are they willing to go on record? Marcus asked. One is. The other is scared of retaliation. Henderson apparently has connections throughout the restaurant industry here. Marcus wasn't surprised. Men like Henderson often wielded influence beyond their immediate businesses, using their networks to punish anyone who challenged them. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Angela wanted to film it at the Veterans Memorial downtown, with Marcus in uniform. The symbolism would be powerful. A decorated soldier standing before monuments to American heroes, fighting for the same freedoms they had died protecting. Meanwhile, Hendersons seemed to be preparing their own response. Marcus noticed increased activity on their social media accounts, with posts highlighting their community involvement and charitable donations. They shared photos of diverse staff members, though Marcus noticed these were mostly kitchen workers rather than management or front-of-house positions. A friend who worked in marketing called to warn Marcus that Henderson's had hired a public relations firm. They're going into damage control mode, she said. Expect them to try to discredit you. Sure enough, by Thursday morning, someone had leaked details about Marcus's military record to online forums. While his service had been exemplary, they focused on a minor disciplinary action from his first year of service, a weekend restriction for being late to formation. The post tried to paint him as unreliable and dishonest. They're really reaching, Chris told Marcus over the phone. A weekend restriction? Half the guys I served with had worse than that. It's not about the facts, Marcus replied. It's about creating doubt. If they can make people question my character, they can discredit my story. The news interview went well. Angela asked tough, but fair questions, giving Marcus a chance to present his case clearly. He spoke about his military service, his qualifications for the management position, and the conversation with Henderson. Most importantly, he emphasized that this wasn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of discrimination that affects our entire community, Marcus said, looking directly into the camera. When businesses like Henderson's exclude qualified people based on race, they're not just hurting individuals. They're weakening our economy and betraying American values. The story aired during the evening news on Thursday. The reaction was immediate and intense. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts of support. Local veterans groups announced they would join his cause. The NAACP scheduled a press conference for Friday. But Henderson's wasn't staying quiet. By Friday morning, they had released their own statement through their PR firm. It denied all allegations of discrimination and claimed that Marcus had been rejected because of concerns about his attitude during the interview. Mr. Thompson displayed hostility and made inappropriate demands during our meeting, the statement read. Our decision was based solely on his unprofessional behavior, not his race or veteran status. Marcus read the statement with a mixture of anger and admiration. It was clever, impossible to disprove, and designed to shift blame back to him. Henderson's lawyers had clearly crafted every word carefully. They're calling me hostile and unprofessional, Marcus told Jennifer. The same words they always use to justify discrimination. Anyone who knows you will see right through that, she replied. You're the most professional person I know. But Marcus understood the game Henderson's was playing. They were trying to create reasonable doubt, to make people wonder if maybe Marcus really had been inappropriate. It was a classic defense strategy. Attack the victim's credibility rather than address the underlying issues. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. Henderson's had shown they would fight dirty, using their resources and connections to protect their reputation. But Marcus had something they didn't expect, the support of a community that had finally had enough of quiet discrimination. As he prepared for the NAACP press conference, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was no longer just about getting justice for himself. He was fighting for every person of color who had ever been told they didn't fit the culture. Every veteran who had come home to face prejudice. Every American who believed that merit should matter more than melanin. The war was just beginning, and Henderson's was about to discover that they had chosen the wrong enemy. The NAACP press conference drew a larger crowd than anyone expected. Marcus stood behind the podium outside the county courthouse, flanked by civil rights leaders, veteran advocates, and a growing number of supporters. Local media had positioned their cameras prominently, while dozens of community members held signs reading "Service before color" and Henderson's, "Change or Close." Dr. Patricia Williams, the local NAACP chapter president, introduced Marcus with a powerful speech about the ongoing struggle for equality in employment. When our veterans come home from defending freedom abroad, they should not have to fight for basic respect at home, she declared to applause from the crowd. Marcus approached the microphone feeling the weight of history. His grandfather had fought for civil rights in the 1960s, facing police dogs and fire hoses. His father had broken color barriers in corporate America through quiet perseverance. Now, it was his turn to carry the torch forward. I didn't choose this fight, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. But when Robert Henderson looked me in the eye and told me I didn't fit his culture, he forced my hand. Today, I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for every qualified person who has been turned away from opportunities because of the color of their skin. The crowd responded enthusiastically as Marcus detailed the pattern of discrimination at Henderson's. He introduced two former employees who had agreed to speak publicly about their experiences. Maria Santos, a former server, described how managers routinely made racist jokes and assigned her the worst tables. David Johnson, who had worked in the kitchen, explained how employees of color were passed over for promotions regardless of their qualifications. "I worked there for 3 years," David said, his voice shaking slightly. "I watched less qualified white employees get promoted while I stayed in the same position. When I complained, they cut my hours until I was forced to quit." The local media coverage was extensive, with all 3 network affiliates leading their evening broadcasts with the story. Marcus's phone rang constantly, with interview requests from regional and national outlets. The story was spreading beyond the local community, attracting attention from civil rights organizations across the country. Henderson's response came swiftly and aggressively. By Saturday morning, they had released a second statement, this time attacking the credibility of the former employees who had spoken at the press conference. They claimed Maria had been fired for poor performance and suggested David was making false accusations to support a friend's lawsuit. More concerning was the coordinated effort to discredit Marcus personally. Someone had created fake social media profiles spreading rumors about his military service and personal character. Anonymous callers harassed his wife at work. His children received cruel messages through their school social media accounts. "They're trying to make this personal," Marcus told Rebecca during an emergency meeting at her law office. "They want me to back down and disappear." "This is actually good news for our case," Rebecca replied, reviewing the latest statements from Henderson's. "They're showing a pattern of retaliation against anyone who speaks out. That's illegal and will strengthen our position." Rebecca had been busy building their legal strategy. She had filed motions for discovery, demanding Henderson's employment records, customer complaints, and internal communications. She also requested financial records to demonstrate the economic impact of their discriminatory practices. "The discovery process is where we'll really hurt them," Rebecca explained. "If they've been systematically discriminating, their own documents will prove it. Companies like this rarely think to cover their electronic tracks." Meanwhile, the community response continued to grow. Veterans organizations announced a planned boycott of Henderson's, encouraging their members to take their business elsewhere. The local chapter of the Urban League organized peaceful protests outside the restaurant during peak dinner hours. Social media campaigns urged customers to share their own experiences with discrimination at the establishment. Marcus was surprised by the diversity of support. White veterans stood beside black civilians. Young college students marched with elderly civil rights activists. The issue had transcended racial lines to become about fundamental American values of fairness and respect. But Henderson's had resources too. Marcus noticed increased security at the restaurant, with uniformed guards checking identifications and questioning people who lingered in the parking lot. They hired additional PR professionals to manage their crisis communications. Most troubling, they seem to be mounting a counter-campaign in certain circles of the community. "They're fighting back hard," Chris warned Marcus during a phone call. "I heard Henderson's been calling his business associates, trying to get them to pressure you to drop this." Marcus wasn't surprised. Men like Henderson didn't build successful businesses without learning how to leverage relationships and apply pressure. But he had underestimated the strength of the opposition he would face. The first serious threat came on Monday morning. Marcus received a call from his former employer, the logistics company where he had worked before starting his job search. "Marcus, this is Tom Bradley. I need to speak with you about this restaurant situation." Tom had been Marcus's supervisor and had given him an excellent reference for the Henderson's position, but his tone now was cold and uncomfortable. "I'm getting calls from some of our clients," Tom continued. "Important clients who are concerned about the company's association with you. They're suggesting we might want to distance ourselves from this controversy." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "What are you saying, Tom?" "I'm saying that your public activism is affecting business relationships. Some of these clients do business with Henderson's. They see your lawsuit as an attack on their associates. So, you want me to stay quiet about discrimination? I want you to consider the bigger picture here. Is one job interview worth damaging multiple business relationships?" Marcus ended the call feeling shaken. Henderson's influence extended further than he had realized. They were using economic pressure to try to isolate him, turning his fight for justice into a threat to his professional network. But If Henderson thought economic intimidation would work, he had miscalculated badly. Marcus called Rebecca immediately to report the conversation. "This is witness intimidation," Rebecca said firmly. "They're trying to coerce you into dropping your case by threatening your livelihood. Document every contact like this. It will become evidence of their retaliatory pattern." The legal process was moving forward despite Henderson's attempts to intimidate witnesses. Rebecca had received the first batch of discovery materials from Henderson's lawyers, and the documents were revealing. Internal emails showed clear patterns of bias in hiring decisions. Customer complaint logs had been systematically purged of discrimination-related issues. Most damaging, personnel files showed that employees of color consistently received lower performance ratings than their white colleagues, even when objective metrics suggested otherwise. "They've been sloppy with their documentation," Rebecca told Marcus excitedly. "Look at this email from Henderson to his general manager last year." She showed him a printed email discussing a job applicant. Henderson had written, "Technically qualified, but probably wouldn't fit our clientele expectations. Let's keep looking for better culture fit." The applicant was clearly identifiable as a person of color from the attached resume and references. The email demonstrated exactly the kind of coded discrimination language that civil rights law was designed to combat. "This is smoking gun evidence," Rebecca explained. "He's using culture fit as a euphemism for racial discrimination. No reasonable jury would miss that." Marcus studied the email carefully. It was dated just 6 months before his own interview, showing that Henderson's discriminatory practices were ongoing and systematic, not isolated incidents. The emotional toll of the fight was becoming significant. Marcus found himself constantly checking social media for new attacks on his character. He started at unexpected noises and checked his car carefully before driving anywhere. Jennifer worried about the stress affecting his health and their marriage. "Maybe we should consider settling," she suggested one evening as they watched their children playing in the backyard. "You've made your point. The community knows what kind of place Henderson's really is." Marcus understood her concern. The fight was consuming their lives, affecting every aspect of their daily routine. But he couldn't shake the image of Henderson's smug face during that interview, the casual way he had dismissed 8 years of military service because Marcus didn't fit his culture. "If I quit now, Henderson wins," Marcus replied. "Every other business owner who wants to discriminate learns they just have to fight dirty enough to make people give up." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A former Henderson's manager named Patricia Miller contacted Rebecca's office with information that could transform the case. Patricia had worked at the restaurant for 12 years before quitting in frustration over the discriminatory practices she witnessed. "I kept notes," Patricia explained during a meeting at Rebecca's office. "Every incident, every discriminatory comment, every qualified person of color who was rejected for bogus reasons. I knew someday someone would need this evidence." Patricia's documentation was meticulous and devastating. She had records of Henderson personally rejecting qualified minority applicants while hiring less qualified white candidates. She had witnessed him making racist comments about customers and employees. Most importantly, she had recorded conversations on her phone when she felt particularly egregious discrimination was occurring. "Why didn't you speak up before?" Marcus asked. Patricia looked down at her hands. "I was scared. Henderson made it clear what happened to people who crossed him. But when I saw your story on the news, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Some things are more important than job security." Rebecca reviewed Patricia's materials with growing excitement. "This is enough to prove systematic discrimination beyond any reasonable doubt. We're talking about a potential class action lawsuit affecting dozens of people over more than a decade." Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. The evidence confirmed what he had suspected about Henderson's, but it also revealed how many people had suffered in silence over the years. How many qualified employees have been passed over? How many customers have been treated poorly? How many potential Marcus Thompsons had simply walked away without fighting back? The revelation of Patricia's evidence marked a turning point in the battle. Henderson's had assumed they were fighting one angry veteran with limited resources. Instead, they were facing a mountain of evidence compiled by someone who understood their system from the inside. But Marcus knew Henderson wouldn't give up easily. Men like him didn't build successful businesses by backing down from fights. The real war was just beginning, and Henderson still had cards to play. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of the battle, he reflected on how much had changed since that afternoon in Henderson's dining room. He had started seeking justice for one act of discrimination and uncovered a systematic pattern of civil rights violations. He had found his voice and inspired others to find theirs. Henderson's fine dining was about to discover that sometimes the people you underestimate turn out to be your most dangerous enemies. The discovery of Patricia Miller's evidence transformed the legal landscape, but Henderson's response was swift and vicious. Within 48 hours of Rebecca filing the expanded class action lawsuit, Marcus found himself facing a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. Henderson's legal team filed countersuits claiming defamation, business interference, and conspiracy. They alleged that Marcus had organized a malicious campaign to damage the restaurant's reputation through false accusations. The countersuits sought damages in excess of $2 million, clearly designed to frighten Marcus and his supporters into backing down. "This is a slap suit," Rebecca explained during an emergency meeting with Marcus and Jennifer. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're using the legal system to intimidate you into silence." The financial pressure was immediate and crushing. Rebecca's firm was excellent, but small, and fighting multiple complex lawsuits simultaneously would require resources they didn't possess. Henderson's had hired Gibson, Crawford and Associates, one of the region's most prestigious and expensive law firms, with a reputation for destroying opponents through sheer legal firepower. "They're going to try to bleed us dry with legal fees," Rebecca warned. "Every motion they file costs us time and money to respond to. It's legal warfare designed to break our will to fight." But Marcus had learned something important during his military service. Desperate enemies often made critical mistakes. Henderson's aggressive response suggested fear, and fearful people rarely thought clearly. The media coverage of the countersuits backfired spectacularly for Henderson's. Rather than appearing as innocent victims fighting false accusations, they looked like wealthy bullies trying to crush a whistleblower. Editorial writers criticized their tactics. Veterans groups rallied more forcefully to Marcus's defense. The local bar association issued a statement condemning the use of slap suits to silence civil rights complainants. More importantly, Henderson's legal aggression encouraged other victims to come forward. Patricia Miller's courage in speaking publicly inspired additional former employees to contact Rebecca's office with their own stories and evidence. Within a week, the class action lawsuit had grown to include 17 plaintiffs representing more than a decade of systematic discrimination. Among the new plaintiffs was James Rodriguez, a former assistant manager who had been demoted after questioning Henderson's hiring practices. James brought with him copies of employment records he had secretly preserved, showing clear disparities in how employees of different races were evaluated and promoted. "I knew keeping these documents was risky," James admitted during his deposition. "But I also knew that someday someone would need proof of what was really happening there." Another crucial witness was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a prominent physician who had been refused service at Henderson's 3 years earlier. Dr. Mitchell's reservation had been mysteriously canceled when she arrived for her anniversary dinner, despite multiple confirmations. She had been told the restaurant was fully booked, but observed several empty tables that remained unused throughout the evening. "I knew exactly what was happening," Dr. Mitchell testified, "but I was busy with my medical practice and didn't have time to fight about one dinner. Now I realize that my silence allowed this behavior to continue." The expansion of the lawsuit created new problems for Henderson's. Rebecca's discovery requests now covered years of employment records, customer complaints, and internal communications. The volume of potentially damaging evidence was enormous, and Henderson's lawyers were struggling to control the narrative. Meanwhile, the economic impact on Henderson's was becoming visible. The veterans' boycott had reduced their weekend dinner crowds by an estimated 40%. Corporate events were being canceled as companies decided they couldn't risk association with the controversy. The restaurant's Yelp and Google reviews were flooded with negative comments, both from people sharing discrimination experiences and supporters expressing solidarity with Marcus. Henderson tried to counter the negative publicity with a charm offensive. He granted interviews claiming to be the real victim of an organized attack on a family business. He highlighted the restaurant's charitable donations and community involvement. He even announced the creation of a diversity and inclusion program, though skeptics noted it was administered entirely by existing white management. Classic damage control, observed Dr. Williams from the NAACP. They're trying to appear responsive while changing nothing fundamental about their practices. But Henderson's problems were deepening beyond the legal and publicity fronts. Rebecca's investigation had uncovered financial irregularities that suggested potential tax evasion and wage theft affecting employees of color. The state Labor Department launched its own investigation after receiving Rebecca's findings. The IRS began asking questions about unreported income and suspicious deductions. Most damaging was the revelation that Henderson's had been systematically underreporting tips for employees of color while accurately reporting them for white employees. This practice not only violated labor law, but constituted tax fraud as it reduced the restaurant's payroll tax obligations while cheating employees out of Social Security credits and unemployment benefits. This goes way beyond employment discrimination, Rebecca explained to Marcus. We're looking at a criminal enterprise that used racial bias to commit financial crimes. The Department of Justice is now interested in this case. The federal attention marked a significant escalation. What had started as a civil rights complaint was evolving into a comprehensive investigation of Henderson's business practices. Marcus found himself cooperating with FBI agents gathering evidence of financial crimes connected to the discriminatory employment patterns. But Henderson wasn't finished fighting. His next move was more personal and dangerous than anything that had come before. Marcus began noticing the same car parked near his house at different times of day. His wife received anonymous phone calls with no one speaking on the other end. Their children reported being followed home from school by strangers. They're trying to intimidate your family, Rebecca said grimly when Marcus reported the incidents. We need to take this to law enforcement immediately. The FBI investigation into the harassment revealed a disturbing pattern. Henderson had hired a private security firm with a reputation for aggressive tactics against civil rights activists. Phone records showed multiple calls between Henderson and the firm's owner during the weeks following Marcus's press conference. This is witness intimidation and conspiracy to violate civil rights, explained FBI agent Sandra Torres during a meeting with Marcus and Rebecca. Mr. Henderson is looking at serious federal charges if we can prove he ordered harassment of your family. The investigation into Henderson's harassment tactics backfired catastrophically for the restaurant owner. Local law enforcement, already skeptical of Henderson's claims about being victimized by false accusations, now saw clear evidence of criminal behavior. The district attorney announced that a grand jury would consider criminal charges against Henderson and several associates. The legal pressure was taking a visible toll on Henderson personally. Marcus observed him during court hearings and noticed the once confident businessman looked haggard and stressed. Henderson's wife had reportedly left town to stay with relatives, unable to cope with the scrutiny and social ostracism. Their adult children were facing pressure at their own jobs as their father's reputation crumbled. But the most significant development was happening inside Henderson's restaurant itself. Faced with mounting legal fees, declining revenue, and the cost of the private security firm, Henderson was struggling to maintain operations. Key employees were quitting rather than be associated with the controversy. Suppliers were demanding payment in advance due to concerns about the restaurant's financial stability. Marcus learned about Henderson's internal problems from Patricia Miller, who maintained friendships with several current employees. They're cutting staff hours and skipping routine maintenance, she reported. The place is falling apart from the inside. The financial pressure on Henderson's was compounded by their legal strategy. Gibson, Crawford and Associates was billing hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, far exceeding what Henderson had anticipated when he decided to fight the discrimination charges. The prestigious law firm had a reputation for thorough but expensive representation, and their meter was running constantly as they dealt with multiple lawsuits and federal investigations. Henderson's caught in a death spiral, Rebecca observed. Every aggressive move he makes generates more legal costs and bad publicity, but he's too proud to settle and too deep in debt to stop fighting. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Henderson had started this battle confident that he could crush one unemployed veteran through superior resources and legal firepower. Instead, his attempts to intimidate and destroy his opponents had exposed criminal behavior and generated federal attention that threatened to destroy everything he had built. As the fourth month of the legal battle approached, Marcus reflected on how completely the situation had transformed. What had begun as a simple employment discrimination case had evolved into a comprehensive investigation of a corrupt business built on systematic civil rights violations. Henderson's Fine Dining, once a pillar of the community's business establishment, was becoming a symbol of how prejudice and arrogance could destroy even successful enterprises. The veteran who had been turned away for not fitting the culture was now leading a coalition that was dismantling that culture piece by piece. Henderson had challenged the wrong soldier, and now he was learning what happened when you underestimated the determination of someone who had survived multiple combat tours. The battle was entering its final phase, and Henderson's was running out of ammunition to fight with. The end came faster than anyone expected. Gray Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 months after Marcus Thompson had been turned away from his job interview, Henderson's Fine Dining closed its doors permanently. The once proud restaurant that had served the city's elite for 43 years was shuttered by federal marshals executing seizure orders related to the ongoing criminal investigation. Marcus stood across the street from the restaurant, watching as investigators carried boxes of evidence from the building. The ornate sign that had welcomed discriminating diners for nearly half a century was being removed by maintenance workers. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the cold wind where elegant patrons had once waited for valet parking. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer asked, taking his hand as they observed the scene together. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Sam, mostly. This didn't have to happen. If Henderson had just treated people fairly, his restaurant could still be thriving." The final collapse of Henderson's had been swift and devastating. The federal investigation had uncovered not just employment discrimination and witness intimidation, but a complex web of financial crimes involving tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud. Henderson had been using his restaurant as a front for illegal activities that extended far beyond discriminatory hiring practices. The breakthrough had come when FBI forensic accountants discovered that Henderson had been systematically skimming cash receipts to avoid paying taxes while simultaneously claiming false deductions for employees who didn't exist. He had created phantom minority employees on paper to qualify for diversity tax credits, while actually maintaining an all-white management structure. The scheme had generated millions in illegal profits over more than a decade. This case is about much more than employment discrimination, federal prosecutor Maria Gonzalez had announced during Henderson's indictment hearing. Mr. Henderson used racial prejudice as a tool to commit systematic financial fraud against the United States government and the people he employed. Henderson himself was facing 23 federal charges, including conspiracy, fraud, tax evasion, civil rights violations, and witness intimidation. His bail had been set at $2 million, which he couldn't afford after his assets were frozen pending investigation. He was currently being held at the Federal Detention Center, awaiting trial. The legal victory was comprehensive, but the personal cost had been significant. Marcus had spent 6 months of his life fighting a battle he never wanted to wage. His family had endured harassment, threats, and social pressure that strained their relationships and tested their resolve. The stress had affected his sleep, his health, and his faith in basic human decency. But the victory was meaningful beyond his personal situation. The class action lawsuit had been settled for $12 million, providing compensation for 17 victims of discrimination spanning more than a decade. More importantly, the case had established legal precedents that would make it easier for future discrimination victims to seek justice. "You changed the law," Rebecca had explained during their final meeting. "The evidence we uncovered and the prosecution we achieved will be cited in civil rights cases for years to come." The settlement money allowed Marcus to start his own consulting business, helping other veterans transition to civilian careers. He used his experience navigating discrimination and legal challenges to advocate for other service members who face similar obstacles. Within a year, his veteran employment services had helped more than 200 former soldiers find meaningful work in private industry. Patricia Miller, the former manager whose evidence had been crucial to the case, used her portion of the settlement to start a nonprofit organization focused on workplace civil rights education. She traveled to businesses throughout the region, conducting training sessions on preventing discrimination and creating inclusive work environments. "I stayed silent for too long," Patricia explained during one of her presentations. "But sometimes it takes witnessing real courage to find your own voice." The former Henderson's building stood empty for 8 months after the closure, a stark reminder of how quickly success built on discrimination could crumble. Local newspapers ran anniversary articles about the case, often featuring the haunting image of the vacant restaurant with its broken windows and faded paint. Eventually, a group of local investors purchased the building and transformed it into a community center focused on veteran services and civil rights education. The Marcus Thompson Community Center opened on the 1-year anniversary of Henderson's closure, providing job training, legal assistance, and counseling services for veterans and discrimination victims. "It's fitting that this place of exclusion became a place of inclusion," Dr. Williams from the NAACP observed during the center's dedication ceremony. "Sometimes justice involves not just punishing wrongdoing, but transforming the spaces where it occurred." Henderson's criminal trial took place 14 months after his arrest. Marcus testified about the discrimination he had experienced, but his testimony was a small part of the case that revealed extensive criminal activity affecting dozens of people over many years. The evidence was overwhelming, and Henderson's legal team eventually negotiated a plea agreement to avoid a lengthy trial. Robert Henderson was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $14 million in restitution to victims and the government. The judge, in announcing the sentence, specifically cited Henderson's abuse of his position of power and his targeting of vulnerable employees and job seekers. Mr. Henderson used prejudice and discrimination as tools to commit crimes against individuals and society, Judge Patricia Collins stated. His actions betrayed the trust placed in him as an employer and community leader. Henderson's wife divorced him during his incarceration, taking custody of their assets that weren't seized by the government. His adult children changed their names to distance themselves from the scandal. The family that had once been prominent in local society was completely destroyed by the consequences of systematic discrimination and corruption. Marcus occasionally thought about Henderson during quiet moments, wondering if the former restaurant owner understood how his prejudices had led to his downfall. A simple decision to judge people by their qualifications rather than their skin color could have prevented all the suffering that followed. But Henderson had chosen to maintain his discriminatory culture, and that choice had ultimately destroyed everything he had built. The broader impact of the case extended far beyond Henderson's personal fate. Other businesses in the region implemented comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs to avoid similar legal challenges. The local Chamber of Commerce established civil rights guidelines for member businesses. Several other discrimination cases were filed, as victims found courage to speak out after seeing Marcus's success. Most significantly, the case attracted national attention to the ongoing problem of employment discrimination against veterans of color. Congressional hearings were held examining how systemic racism affected military personnel transitioning to civilian careers. New federal programs were created to address these challenges, including expanded legal protections and enhanced oversight of government contractors' hiring practices. One person's courage to speak truth changed an entire system, observed retired General Michael Foster during congressional testimony about veteran employment discrimination. Sergeant Thompson's case demonstrates why we can never accept discrimination against any American who served our country. Marcus found fulfillment in his new career helping other veterans, but the experience had changed him in fundamental ways. He was more cautious about trusting people, more aware of the persistence of racial prejudice, and more appreciative of the courage required to challenge injustice. The idealistic young soldier who had believed military service would earn universal respect was gone, replaced by a more realistic but determined advocate for equality. I learned that serving your country doesn't protect you from racism, Marcus reflected during a speech at the community center named in his honor. But I also learned that one person with the courage to fight back can achieve more than they ever imagined possible. Jennifer often said that the discrimination lawsuit had revealed her husband's true character in ways that 8 years of marriage hadn't. I knew Marcus was brave, she explained to friends, but I didn't know he was willing to risk everything for principle. Their children, now old enough to understand what had happened, were proud of their father's stand but also aware of the costs involved. They had learned firsthand that fighting injustice required sacrifices and that courage sometimes meant enduring pain for long-term gains. Dad showed us that some things are more important than being comfortable, their teenage daughter wrote in a school essay about civil rights. He could have stayed quiet and avoided all the problems, but then nothing would have changed. 5 years after Henderson's closure, Marcus received an unexpected letter from Robert Henderson himself, written from federal prison. The former restaurant owner apologized for his discriminatory behavior and asked for forgiveness. He claimed that prison had given him time to reflect on the harm his prejudices had caused. Marcus read the letter several times before deciding how to respond. Eventually, he wrote back acknowledging Henderson's apology, but explaining that forgiveness was a process that would take time. More importantly, he suggested that Henderson use his remaining years to advocate against discrimination from within the prison system, where racial prejudice remained a serious problem. True redemption requires action, not just words, Marcus wrote. If you really want to make amends, use your experience to help other people understand how destructive discrimination can be. The exchange of letters continued for several years, with Henderson gradually becoming an advocate for civil rights education in federal prisons. He worked with nonprofit organizations to develop programs addressing racial bias and discrimination. His insider perspective on how prejudice could corrupt entire organizations became valuable in training other business leaders. People need to see the real consequences of discrimination, Henderson wrote in one letter. I lost my business, my family, my freedom, and my reputation because I couldn't see past the color of people's skin. If sharing my story prevents even one other person from making the same mistakes, maybe some good can come from all this destruction. The correspondence remained private until after Henderson's release from prison, when both men agreed to participate in a documentary about the case. The film, titled Culture Clash, examined how discrimination had destroyed a successful business and transformed the lives of everyone involved. This story isn't really about me or Mr. Henderson, Marcus explained during interviews promoting the documentary. It's about a country still struggling to live up to its ideals of equality and justice. We've made progress, but we still have work to do. The documentary won several awards and was used in diversity training programs across corporate America. It became a powerful tool for demonstrating the real-world consequences of workplace discrimination, showing how prejudice could destroy not just individual lives, but entire organizations. Marcus Thompson's fight against discrimination had begun with a single job interview gone wrong. It ended with systematic changes that affected thousands of people across multiple institutions. One veteran's refusal to accept injustice had dismantled a corrupt enterprise and created lasting improvements in civil rights enforcement. The empty space where Henderson's Fine Dining once stood had become the Marcus Thompson Community Center, a place where veterans of all backgrounds could find support and opportunity. Every day, people who might have been turned away by the old culture found welcome and assistance in building better lives. Sometimes the most important victories come from battles we never wanted to fight, fought by people who never asked to be heroes. Marcus Thompson had wanted nothing more than a job managing a restaurant. Instead, he had become a catalyst for justice whose impact would be felt for generations to come. The culture at Henderson's Fine Dining was finally gone forever, replaced by something far better, a community committed to ensuring that service to country and strength of character mattered more than the color of anyone's skin.